Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is pretty straightforward. You bring us this massive stack of sources, the corporate histories, financial thrillers, startup stories, and we try to boil it all down.
Find the patterns.
Exactly. Find the patterns, get to the crucial insights. We're really trying to cut through the noise, understand the architecture of, well, modern power and wealth.
And today's material is fascinating because it gives us these really sharp contrasts. We're looking at, totally different fields.
Right.
We've got Silicon Valley disruption, we've got old school retail operations, and then the kind of brutal calculus of Wall Street.
Yeah, we've got founders making these impossible choices in dorm rooms, it feels like. Then titans plotting huge buyouts in boardrooms, and even political figures using physical infrastructure to bake in inequality.
And the thread tying it all together.
It seems to be how these key decisions about culture, tech, or just getting access to tons of money, how they shape these massive companies that, impact everyone.
Precisely. We're digging into the mechanisms. What are the drives, intellectual and financial, that fuel this chase for huge scale?
So comparing the sort of disruptive genius you need to start something?
Yeah, versus the, let's say, managerial force needed to keep it going against, well, immense scale, market downturns, public opinion, ethical questions, all of it.
Okay, so this deep dive, we're hitting the intense focus needed to launch the huge financial fights that change industries, and I guess the ethical price tag that often comes with that level of ambition.
That's the plan. Should be quite a ride.
All right, let's dive into that first part. The sheer intellectual energy it takes to actually, start something huge. The sources really emphasize this need for obsessive focus.
Right.
And sometimes, maybe more importantly, the guts to just pivot, to walk away from what you even told your investors you were building.
Oh, definitely. And the story of Instagram's founders, Systrom and Krieger, is the classic example of this, the power of subtraction.
Okay, so they started with bourbon, right?
Yeah, bourbon. It got seed funding. It was meant to be this location-based social network, kind of like Foursquare, but with photos added on.
But it was too much.
Way too much. It was clunky, tried to do a dozen things okay-ish, but nothing really great.
And this is the fascinating part. They actually stopped working on the thing they'd raised money for.
That's the critical leadership call, isn't it? It takes real nerve to essentially kill your own creation, something you successfully sold.
So what did they see?
They saw that the only feature people were actually using consistently was the photo sharing. That was it.
No.
So they just cut everything else, the check-ins, the point system, the virtual bourbon stuff, gone. They have focused entirely on one single thing, making mobile photos look great.
That radical simplification.
That's the pivot. And it really echoes, the audio story, too.
Yeah.
Dorsey, Williams, the whole team there, pivoting away from podcasting.
The focus on Twitter, yeah. Oh, microblogging.
Exactly. Same principle. Subtract to amplify.
But it's not just a tech thing, this intense focus. The sources show it happening in totally traditional businesses, too, just maybe applied differently, like Ray Kroc at McDonald's.
Well, Kroc's focus wasn't about pivoting or creating something new from scratch. It was about perfection, replication, at massive scale.
His level of detail was insane, man.
Legendary. He wasn't just thinking about strategy or expansion. He was obsessed with the process. He'd apparently stand for hours just watching the guy on the griddle.
Just watching.
Yeah, how the patties were placed, how the griddle was scraped clean. Total immersion in the mechanics of it.
And the sources mentioned this specific fixation he had on the French fries. It wasn't just casual interest. He genuinely believed there was some secret something to them. He demanded to see the whole process himself, even after the McDonald brothers had written it all down for him. Why focus so much on a fry?
Because that's how you build quality at scale. That's how you get that predictable experience, coast to coast. Crockery knew that tiny details, the exact cut of the potato, the precise time in the fryer, how the salt was applied, that perfection at the margin was the only way to maintain a quality reputation when you're serving millions every single day.
So if one franchise had slightly different fries,
the whole perception crumbles.
Right.
So that granular focus, that refusal to accept anything but mechanical perfection in a seemingly simple task, that's a recipe for scaling.
It's interesting, though, because sometimes innovation isn't about perfection. It's just desperation, local pressure, like the Filet-O-Fish story.
Oh, that's a great example of hyper-local problem solving. Lou Grown, a franchisee down in Cincinnati.
Right.
He was getting absolutely crushed on Fridays by the local big boy chain. They had a popular fish sandwich.
Down in Cincinnati.
had a huge Catholic population, no meat on Fridays. So Groen's McDonald's was basically empty 1 day a week. He was losing serious money.
So the Filet-O-Fish wasn't some top-down corporate idea. It was Groen trying to stop the bleeding.
Totally. It was his way to compete with Big Boy, specifically on Fridays, serving this very specific religious and cultural need that, HQ hadn't even considered. It wasn't genius planning. It was targeted survival.
Survival, yeah. But it shows that sometimes the best ideas come from the front lines, right? The person actually losing the money.
Absolutely. The insight comes from the point of pain, not always the corner office.
Okay, let's swing back to early tech. Bill Gates. His intellectual intensity seems foundational to Microsoft's whole strategy.
Yeah, the stories about Gates at Harvard are intense. He had apparently signed up for grad-level math classes.
Okay.
Sit there, no notebook, head in his hands, looking completely bored.
Uh-huh.
But then suddenly, he'd spot this tiny mistake in some super complex proof on the board, something everyone else, including the professor, had missed.
He'd just call it out.
Apparently just blurt out, "You made a mistake, I'll show you." Trace the error and basically stump the professor. He only seemed interested in the really hard problems, the ones others thought were impossible.
Wow. And that kind of brain power wasn't just for show, right? It became strategic, like with IBM and Project Chess.
Crucial strategic weapon. When IBM was planning their first PC, Gates advised them on the chip.
Right.
He pushed them hard to use the newer, more advanced 16-bit Intel 8086 chip instead of the older 8-bit 8080 they were leaning towards.
Okay, break that down for us. Why was 16-bit versus 8-bit such a big deal strategically? What did that unlock for Microsoft?
It was all about potential, headroom. An 8-bit chip like the 8080 was just limited in how much memory it could handle, the complexity of instructions.
Got it.
The 16-bit 8086 could handle data twice as wide and critically address way more memory. So the strategic play was this. It allowed Microsoft to write much bigger, much more powerful software for IBM's new machine.
Software that could grow.
Exactly. Software that would eventually become Windows, graphical interfaces, complex operating systems. Gates saw that the hardware choice would define the software ceiling for years to come.
So it was like designing the battlefield for the future software wars.
Pretty much. An OS land grab based on seeing the hardware trajectory. Now, contrast that kind of intellectual strategy with, say, the sheer force of will you see with Jeff Bezos at Amazon.
Right, his whole work-life harmony thing, not balance, harmony.
Yeah, and that sounds nice, but it's a subtle shift with huge implications for culture, doesn't it?
How so? What does harmony imply that balance doesn't?
Well, balance suggests work and life are separate things you need to juggle, maybe offset. Harmony implies they should just flow together, meaning work is always there, you're always potentially on.
Right, no separation.
Bezos pushed this relentless pace, work hard, smart, and long. And it was fueled by his absolute conviction that Amazon was undervalued.
Undervalued, even as it grew.
In his view, yes. He believed the world just didn't get what Amazon was going to become. So the only response was relentless, urgent work to build that future he saw. It's a culture built on chronic urgency and this almost messianic belief in the vision.
That kind of empire-building drive, it's not just a U.S. thing, though. We see similar intensity, but maybe within a different government structure when we look at China's tech boom.
Absolutely. The sources talk about China creating this genuine alternate internet universe. It runs parallel to the U.S. model, but it's largely self-contained and built on an incredible scale.
And that wasn't just organic growth from startups.
Not entirely. There was intentional design. You can trace a key moment back to around 2010 with Guo Hong's efforts to transform the Zhongguancun tech zone in Beijing.
Right, Zhongguancun. It had this reputation.
Yeah, it wanted to be the Silicon Valley of China, but really it was mostly just a big market selling cheap electronics and lots of pirated software.
Not exactly a hub of innovation.
No. Hong wanted to fundamentally change that, flip it into a place creating genuine, homegrown, high-tech stuff.
And the government stepped in.
Massively. The real catalyst was a government speech around 2010 that introduced this new national slogan, mass entrepreneurship and mass innovation.
That sounds like more than just encouragement.
It was policy. It signaled a huge state-backed push. Capital flowed, infrastructure was built, regulations were streamlined for tech growth. It was designed to create a real counterweight to Silicon Valley, fast.
So what did mass entrepreneurship actually do? Was it just throwing money around?
It was more structural. Yes, there was investment, but it also meant prioritizing these innovation hubs, fast-tracking certain technologies. And critically, they leveraged the huge domestic market and the ability to gather massive amounts of data that gave them a scale advantage.
And it worked.
Look at the landscape now, the so-called seven giants of the AI age. It's almost an even split. You've got Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft in the U.S.
And Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent in China.
Exactly. That government push, combined with, let's be honest, some protectionist policies, created global competitors in maybe less than a decade. Remarkable speed.
Okay, so once you have that initial spark, that scale, the next level often involves the big machinery of finance.
Right.
And nothing quite shows the ruthless side of that, like the LBO era, the leveraged buyout.
Yeah.
We have to talk about RJR Nabisco.
Oh, that battle was pure financial warfare. High pressure, high stakes. And the sources show it didn't even start with an outside attack. It started with, well, internal backstabbing.
How so?
You had this executive, Wilson, basically deceiving the CEO, Johnson, about bringing another exec, Horrigan, into the chairman's office, kind of a power play setup.
And Horrigan saw right through Johnson.
Immediately. Horrigan knew Johnson's reputation from other companies aggressively taking power. He apparently told Wilson straight up, Ross Johnson will have your job in 18 months. Just remember that.
Wow. Talk about pattern recognition.
Exactly. Corporate foresight based on ambition. And then the external players jumped in, and it got even uglier. This wasn't just about winning the company. No, it was about controlling the architecture of Wall Street itself.
Wow.
You had banks like Wasserstein, Morgan Stanley, Drexel actively trying to crush Shearson's bid.
Not just outbid them, crush them.
Yeah, for reasons way beyond just RJR Nabisco. Drexel, especially. They were the kings of junk bonds at the time.
Right, Milken's operation.
And they were terrified that if Shearson pulled off this massive RJR deal, the huge junk bond offering needed to finance it would instantly make Shearson powerful enough to break Drexel's hammerlock on the junk bond market.
So it was about defending their turf, maintaining dominance by kneecapping a potential rival.
Precisely. It wasn't just a deal, it was a fight for market structure. And the bidding itself was pure psychology.
How do you mean?
Well, the management group's final bid was $101 a share, just $1 over the previous bid.
Okay.
That extra dollar, the sources say, wasn't based on valuation. It was a signal. It showed they still believed Henry Kravis, the KKR guy, was actively bidding against them, even though Kravis was actually off skiing in Vail at that moment.
No way.
Yeah, they were bidding against the idea of Kravis, his perceived willpower, not just a number.
That whole chaotic environment, though, really set the stage for the rise of these huge private equity firms, didn't it? Blackstone's early days kind of show that opportunism. But maybe first let's quickly unpack what an LBO actually is for anyone listening.
Sure. LBO, leveraged buyout. Basically, you buy a company using a lot of borrowed money debt. The company's own assets are often used as the collateral for those loans.
So you put up less of your own cash.
Right. You leverage your investment. If the company does well after you buy it, your return on your own initial money is massively amplified. It's designed to boost returns using, well, OPM, other people's money.
Got it. And Steven Schwartzman at Blackstone, his early story shows that sometimes getting rejected by the old guard is actually helpful.
Yeah, he got turned down by the big, stuffy JP Morgan, so instead he ended up partnering with Chemical Bank.
Chemical, nicknamed Comical Bank.
Kind of jokingly, yeah. They were seen as less prestigious, maybe desperate to get into the LBO game, but they turned out to be incredibly innovative.
How?
Their guy, Jimmy Lee. For one of Blackstone's early deals, Transtar, Chemical did something pretty radical. Instead of spreading the risk around right away, they underwrote the entire loan themselves.
Wow, risky.
But here's the genius part. The loan structure. They tied the interest rate to how well Transtar, the company being bought, actually performed.
So if the company did better,
the interest rate went down.
That is smart. Why was that so revolutionary then?
Because it completely changed the dynamic. It gave the borrower, Blackstone, a huge incentive to improve the business quickly. And it gave the lender, Chemical, confidence that their risk was actually decreasing as the company got healthier. They knew they'd get paid back reliably.
So it moved beyond just relying on Milken's junk bond.
Totally. It let banks like Chemical assemble and syndicate these huge, complex loan packages themselves. Jimmy Lee basically became a powerhouse in leveraged finance because of this flexible, performance-linked approach.
And this points to the bigger role PE firms started playing, right? Being opportunistic when markets were messy.
Exactly. They could step in and buy assets when almost nobody else could or would, especially during recessions or panics. They had access to this newly flexible debt.
So they were investing when things looked bleakest.
Which actually had a stabilizing effect, in a way. By putting billions to work when traditional buyers vanished, they arguably helped put a floor under crashing company valuations. They thrived by leveraging chaos, filling a gap the mainstream markets couldn't.
Okay, if you take that massive financial machinery, the LBOs, the private equity model, and you combine it with how capital itself generates returns, that leads us straight into Thomas Piketty's work on wealth inequality, doesn't it?
Correctly. And Piketty's big insight, looking historically, was kind of counterintuitive. He found that the big drop in income inequality we saw in the first half of the 20th century.
The Great Compression.
Right. It wasn't really because wages for workers got dramatically fairer.
No. Then what caused it?
It was mostly due to the massive destruction of large fortunes, the collapse of income from capital.
So we're talking world wars, the Great Depression, events that literally wiped out vast amounts of accumulated wealth.
Exactly. It was a violent temporary leveling.
Right.
Once things stabilized after World War II, the underlying mechanics that drive inequality kicked back in. And a key part of that is the different rates of return on capital.
Explain that.
Well, if you already have significant capital, you can afford to put it into riskier assets, things like stocks, industrial investments, private equity maybe. These historically tend to yield higher returns, say 7 or 8% a year on average.
Okay. Whereas most people
with smaller savings, they need safety, they need liquidity, so they're stuck in savings accounts, maybe low-yield bonds, earning maybe 1 or 2%, sometimes even less than inflation, so negative real returns.
And over time, that difference.
It compounds massively. The gap between earning 7% and 2% over decades is enormous. It means wealth concentration tends to increase almost automatically. Those who start with more can access higher returns, accelerating the divergence.
Which connects to that Citigroup concept, plutonomy.
Yeah, the plutonomy thesis. It basically argues the global economy is splitting into two blocks. You have the plutonomy, the really rich, small group numerically, but their spending, especially on luxury goods and high-end services, drives a disproportionate amount of economic activity.
And the other block
Is everyone else, the rest, who collectively account for a surprisingly small share of total consumption, according to this thesis.
So if the top 1% are doing most of the consuming and investing, then our usual economic measures, based on averages, they start to become misleading.
That's the implication. The economy becomes increasingly geared towards servicing the needs and wants of the very wealthy. The architecture of wealth isn't just about having money, it's about directing the flow of the entire economy.
This kind of intense drive, this focus needed to build these empires, financial, tech, whatever, it clearly takes a toll. Personally, ethically, the sources paint a pretty stark picture of leadership strain, especially in high finance.
Oh, yeah. The J.P. Morgan firm back in the day had this grim reputation. It was known as a partner killer.
Seriously, partner killer.
That was the term. The workload was just brutal. You had partners like J. Hood Wright literally dropping dead from overwork. Another, J. Edward Coster, died young at 48 from flu and pneumonia, but the New York Times basically blamed the job, saying the tasks piled on him were far heavier than any one man ought to bear.
Wow. That's a heavy price for controlling the nation's finances. But compare that kind of fatal burnout with, say, an earlier tycoon like John D. Rockefeller Sr. His methods seemed more controlled, psychological.
Rockefeller had this unique blend. He genuinely saw immense wealth accumulation as a sort of religious duty. You know, his famous line, get all the money you can, fairly and honestly, keep all you can, and give away all you can.
Right. But the fairly and honestly part is where the debate comes in.
Yeah.
And his management style was quite something.
Absolutely. The pressure he put on people was immense but subtle. His main weapon wasn't yelling or overt threats.
It was silence.
His fidgety silence. That's what the sources call his harshest form of criticism.
Fidgety silence. What does that mean?
If he disapproved of something you did or thought you'd failed, he wouldn't explode. He'd just sit there, maybe cross and uncross his legs over and over and say absolutely nothing.
Leaving the other person just hanging.
Twisting in the wind, wondering if he was furious or just dismissing them. Apparently, they'd get desperate, try to prompt him for any reaction. It was calculated psychological warfare. Maintained his authority without raising his voice.
But that fairly and honestly acquisition. Let's talk about the Cleveland takeover in 1872. That's where he really consolidated his power in oil refining. How did he pull that off?
Well, rivals claimed it was through sheer intimidation, but indirectly. He didn't necessarily threaten them face to face.
So what did he do?
He allegedly orchestrated rumors. terrifying rumors about a secret deal he'd struck with the railroads.
A deal giving him
Preferential shipping rates, basically making it impossible for anyone else to compete. Whether the deal was fully real or just a bluff didn't matter as much as the fear it created.
So refiners just panicked.
They supposedly fell over each other to sell their businesses to him fast and cheap before he could use his secret railroad pact to crush them entirely. It was about exploiting fear and informational asymmetry. Masterful, if ruthless.
Okay, fast forward to the modern tech world. We see a different kind of slipperiness, maybe, around regulations. Theranos is the obvious, painful example.
Oh, Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes and her team played a very specific, very calculated game with regulators. It was creative, you could say, or just sneaky.
What was the core strategy?
They claimed their main device, the Edison machine.
The magic box.
Right. They claimed it wasn't actually doing the complex diagnostic analysis itself. It was just a remote sample processor. Kind of like a dumb fax machine, they argued, just preparing the tiny blood sample to be analyzed elsewhere.
And why was that distinction so critical?
Because it meant, in their view, the Edison didn't need the rigorous, direct FDA approval required for actual diagnostic devices. They said the real analysis happened back in their Palo Alto lab using standard, already approved equipment.
But that completely undermined their whole promise, didn't it? The pinprick tests run on the spot.
Totally. And the scale of the deception was just, wow. One patient who got tested at a Walgreens found out that out of the 240-plus tests Theranos offered, only about 80 were actually being done on the finger prick samples using the Edison.
So for the other two-thirds?
They still needed the dreaded hypodermic needle, the exact thing Holmes claimed she was eliminating. And internally, they knew it wasn't working. Documents showed tests run on the Edisons gave results that differed markedly from results on standard, reliable Siemens and Diasorn machines, especially for common things like vitamin D tests.
They were actively hiding failures while selling the drink.
Covering up critical failures, yeah. It was a house of cards built on regulatory arbitrage and, well, lies.
Finally, let's look at power that's not just financial or corporate, but fundamentally societal and political. The ultimate architect of control, maybe. Robert Moses in New York.
Moses is a fascinating case study in accumulating and wielding raw power. His core insight, according to the sources, was blunt. Ideas are worthless without power.
Doesn't matter how good the plan is if you can't make it happen.
Exactly. When a new mayor like Robert Wagner took office, he apparently knew day one that he had to deal with Moses. Moses held the real power, the control over building the city. The source says, power had spoken, and Moses was that power, regardless of who held elected office.
And he kept that power how? Through sheer force of personality.
Partly, yeah. He was described as a natural bully, that harsh voice rasping over the telephone, threatening to leak stories to the press if he was crossed, constant intimidation.
But the sources also say something interesting, that he'd sometimes back down if really challenged.
Yes. It's a weird paradox of bullies, isn't it?
So if he might back down, why was everyone seemingly so afraid of him? Why didn't more people push back?
Because the fear wasn't just about him, personally. It was about his systemic control. He controlled the money, the permits, the park budgets, the construction contracts, and he cultivated allies in the press. He had levers everywhere.
And he manipulated the bureaucracy itself?
Brilliantly, in a dark way. He'd get other city commissioners to appoint someone as a liaison to his park department. Then Moses would basically co-opt that aid, make them loyal to him.
Turning them into spies?
Pretty much. Spies inside their own departments, feeding him information, furthering his agenda. He built his control right into the government's wiring diagram.
And the impact of that unchecked power. It wasn't neutral. It was actively discriminatory, built into the physical city.
Absolutely. The sources give concrete examples, like the West Side Improvement Project. The numbers are stark.
What do they show?
He built 17 playgrounds in the general project area, but only one in the Harlem section. 5 football fields overall, only one in Harlem.
And other amenities.
0 horseshoe courts for Harlem. 0 tennis courts. 0 roller skating paths. It wasn't accidental. The physical infrastructure was deliberately designed to benefit some communities and neglect or even hinder others, solidifying inequality in concrete and steel. #outro.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive. We've seen these patterns again and again. That intense, sometimes obsessive focus, whether it's Instagram pivoting or Ray Kroc staring at french fries.
Yeah, the value of singular vision.
Then the crucial role of finance. The high-stakes LBO battles like RJR Nabisco, the opportunistic genius of Blackstone's early moves.
And the way financial structures themselves can drive outcomes.
And finally, that constant tension between huge ambition and, well, the ethical consequences. Rockefeller's methods, Moses' wielding of power, the Theranos deception.
Right, the recurring lesson seems clear. Getting immense power often involves finding and exploiting some kind of asymmetry. Maybe it's intellectual, like Gates seeing the 16-bit future. Maybe it's informational, like Rockefeller spreading rumors. Or financial structuring, like the LBO kings.
And to get there, they often had to operate right on that ethical line, or maybe cross it.
Leveraging chaos, psychology, human nature itself to win at that massive scale, it seems to be a frequent ingredient.
Which brings us to a final thought looking ahead. If these titans, these figures we've discussed, built the financial and political systems we live in now.
Systems that, as Piketty showed, tend to naturally widen inequality.
Right. How does that existing structure handle the next big disruption?
And the sources point squarely at AI as that next potential earthquake. There are credible estimates suggesting AI could technically automate maybe 40, even 50% of current U.S. jobs in just the next decade or two.
That's staggering. And it's not just automation, it's the kind of automation, right? Skill biased.
Exactly. It's predicted to disproportionately benefit those who own the capital, own the AI systems, potentially amplifying wealth inequality at an unprecedented speed.
So the big question then is, can the system, the architecture built by yesterday's giants, actually adapt? Can it absorb this economic bounty of AI, as some call it, in a way that's, fair or compassionate, maybe through radical new ideas like social investment stipends or something?
Or is the inherent inequality baked too deep? Will we need fundamentally new social contracts to deal with that level of potential displacement and concentration of wealth and power?
AI represents maybe the ultimate informational asymmetry, doesn't it?
It certainly could. So the question we leave you with is, can the house built by the titans of the 20th century withstand the technological storm of the 21st?
Something to think about. Until the next deep dive, thanks for joining us.